September 26, 2024, Hurricane Helene makes landfall in the Big Bend region of Florida. Following days of rain, the storm dropped upwards of 2 feet of rain on the Carolinas, mainly in western North Carolina and the southern Appalachian Mountain region. More than 100 people were killed. Communities ripped apart, but in Helene's wake, those communities are coming together again. It's a storm that changed preparation and response forever.
Hurricane season, coast to crown. A Pinpoint Weather special presentation on Queen City News, sponsored by Integrity Roofing.
Welcome to Coast to Crown, a Queen City News special. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tara Lane, joined by meteorologist Ted Phaeton, Andrew Brightman, and Brandon Lawson.
How Helene hit the Carolinas has changed the game, from preparation to adjustments made by some groups we rely on to stay safe during severe weather.
In this special, we're taking a closer look at the impact Helene had and the technology used with tracking a tropical system.
We will also see what's being done to better prepare the Carolinas for the next big storm.
It probably comes as no surprise that this hurricane season is expected to finish with an above average amount of storms. Each year prior to June 1st, several organizations issue their seasonal tropical outlooks. At the end of May, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicted an above average season with 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10 of which could become hurricanes, and 3 to 5 of those becoming major hurricanes. Colorado State University had similar numbers with 17 named storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. So what's driving this forecast? You may have heard of El Nino and La Nina, different climate patterns over the Pacific Ocean. Last hurricane season, we were in a La Nina pattern. It's characterized by stronger trade winds, cooler water temperatures, and stronger wind shear. In the Atlantic Ocean basin, this could lead to more hurricanes due to less wind shear, weaker trade winds, and more instability. But back in April, forecasters said the La Nina pattern had ended and the northern hemisphere has now returned to a neutral pattern. This is characterized by normal trade wind activity and near or slightly below normal water temperatures in the Pacific Ocean. However, with the continuation of warmer than average Atlantic Ocean temperatures, low wind shear, and expected increase of storms forming off the African coast, tropical storm formation is expected to be high. Another above average hurricane season, and Brandon, we're seeing this more often.
Our warming planet is also warming our oceans, Tara. The higher water temps are fueling stronger storms, and the tank remains full. New research from nonprofit group Climate Central shows that every Atlantic Basin hurricane last year was made stronger due to human-induced climate warming.
It's really like the speed limit of the hurricane being bumped up because the sea surface temperatures are bumped up. Faster spinning engine means the car can go faster. It also means the hurricane can go faster.
Speaking of faster, new data shows that Helene's maximum intensity was increased by 16 miles per hour. Enough difference to move the historic storm from Category 3 to Category 4 strength.
We're seeing this really clear effect where sea surface temperature warmth did play a role in Hurricane Helene's intensification.
The study shows hurricanes in 2024 strengthened over waters that were as much as 2.5 degrees warmer due to climate change. But it is not just the speed of these systems that is changing.
The chance of higher precipitation for each hurricane is now higher in a warmer world.
UNC Charlotte's Associate Professor of Atmospheric Sciences, Dr. Brian Maggie, notes an increase in heavy rainfall from recent tropical systems.
When you have the conditions set up that a hurricane forms, it draws from that extra water vapor to form higher rates of precipitation.
There's something called the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship. It is a thermodynamic equation that states a 1 degree increase in temperature can allow the atmosphere to hold 4% more moisture or water vapor. That means a 20 degree increase in temperature can allow the water vapor in the atmosphere to double. But it is not just the water in the sky that's causing issues.
Sea level rise is affecting the entire eastern seaboard, and of course the entire eastern seaboard of the United States is vulnerable to the Atlantic Basin's hurricanes.
Even though flooding is a serious impact from hurricanes, storm surge is the leading cause of hurricane-related deaths in the U.S., making sea level rise more threatening.
So every hurricane that approaches the coastline has a greater potential to bring more water into the inland communities that are on the coast.
There is also something about the fast-growing nature of these beasts. According to Climate Central, roughly 80% of major hurricanes undergo rapid intensification, which occurs when a tropical cyclone gains 35 miles per hour or more within 24 hours.
Part of the key to that is where those warm waters are when the hurricane passes over them.
UNC Charlotte's Associate Professor of Meteorology Dr. Matthew Easton explains a contributing factor to rapid intensification is a warm ocean current in the Gulf called the loop current.
And they happen to pass over those warm water features and then rapidly intensify right before landfall. And so Milton was an example, Helene was an example.
Although above normal hurricane seasons appear to be the new normal,
we're still going to have years where there's below average numbers of hurricanes.
Dr. Easton explains there are seasonal variations that could still lead to calmer seasons.
Simply because the waters might be cooler that year, there might be things like an El Nino in place or strong vertical shear. And so it's going to oscillate a lot from year to year, but if you look at the long-term trends, we're going to expect more hurricanes.
The long-term climate projections can be alarming, but there is optimism among scientists.
I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think I'm excited.
What are some of the biggest actions that you've seen so far that have you optimistic about the future?
I think the part that I'm most excited about is the transition to different sources of electricity than what we've used in the past. And so we've already seen a transition away from coal, the use of coal for producing electricity. We've seen that transition to natural gas, but we've also seen it to solar, wind, and hydrothermal.
The way that we solve it is together through conversation. The most important thing that you can do to protect your community from climate change is to have conversations in your community about climate change.
When I spoke with Dr. Maggie about the new normal for hurricane seasons, he says it's hard to say what the new normal is because the planet continues to warm. That means the new average may look different in the coming years.
When it comes to tropical systems, the forecast you see 5 days out might not be what you see when the storm makes landfall. It's one thing to track the forecast, but it's another to track how fast the storm is changing.
Rapid intensification is a phenomenon we've seen more and more in recent years. And it's also why it's more important now than ever to stay updated consistently on the approaching storms. Tropical storms form when warm ocean waters lift up in the atmosphere and feed thunderstorms. This fuel can turn a cluster of storms into powerful, organized structures, giving us a tropical system. But as global sea surface temperatures rise, that fuel becomes more potent and can create a scenario where the storms quickly increase in strength. Now, historically, forecasters had days to warn coastal communities of approaching storms, but the lead time to prepare is greatly dependent on where the storm forms. Some areas may have up to 6 days or more, others less than 24 hours, which is also where you can see some of the hottest sea surface temperatures. Rapid intensification is when a hurricane's winds increase by 35 miles per hour or more in just 24 hours. Nearly 80% of major hurricanes undergo rapid intensification, and it's only getting worse. In fact, recent studies show a 36% increase in these events over the last 2 decades. This graph shows the growing number of storms that experience rapid intensification each year from 1980 to 2023. Notice the uptick in frequency towards the right side of your screen. What's even more concerning is the rising trend in extreme rapid intensification, where winds spike by nearly 60 miles per hour or more in one day. This drastically is cutting down on the amount of time you have to prepare should a storm go from 0 to 100 overnight. Thankfully, you don't have to prepare alone. Your local emergency management office has you covered from forecast to impact and beyond.
We know the storm's coming and the models do the best they can, but it still might be a couple of days out that you might be able to really zero in and know exactly where it's going.
Alan Hook is an emergency management planner with Gaston County. He's one of the people responsible for making sure the public is ready before the winds pick up and the warnings go out.
So if we see a storm coming, we're broadcasting that information. You know, there's a possibility, and it might be a week out, and you just don't know till it gets closer what that impact locally may be.
With recent years seeing the increase of rapid intensification, there's no telling how quickly those impacts can change. That's why Alan says early preparation is key.
You know, we're explaining to people, have a have a go pack ready. If you've got to leave your residence, you've got essential things with you, medication, your cell phone. If you're going to be staying at home and you're going to be sheltering in place, as we like to say, do you have your house prepared? Are you ready? Right now, at the beginning of hurricane season, is the perfect time to prepare that go kit. If I've got to leave, have it ready. If I know that there's going to be some outside winds, some high winds, what outside my house can I go ahead and prepare for now? So at the beginning of hurricane season is a great time to plan for this.
Preparation isn't just about what you pack. It's also about where you go. Look at your county maps and identify shelters in your area should you need to leave your home. And speaking of your home, what's outside of it that could be dangerous as well?
What outside your home could be knocked down or broken loose? Secure that, put it in a safe place so that it doesn't become a flying projectile. What can you do inside the storm, inside your house, to prepare you for the power's out?
It's all hands on deck. Behind the scenes, local agencies coordinate with state and federal partners to prepare for worst case scenarios.
We're going to be tied in with our state partners, North Carolina Office of Emergency Management, who in turn works closely with our federal partners. So we're going to all be watching the same storms. And it may come that the governor of the state declares a state of emergency ahead of a storm to get preparations in place because we know impact is imminent.
That state of emergency can be at the county or state level. Once in place, certain travel and transport restrictions are lifted so resources can get to the right areas. When the storm hits, things change fast. Alerts and notifications are set to go out in case things take that nasty turn.
We have emergency alerting system that we can send out an EAS message. A lot of people understand it as a reverse 911 to forewarn people that there's hazards imminent.
The alerts are often known as reverse 911 calls and can notify you of the immediate threats. But the biggest danger may be the one you don't see coming.
The things I think is important that people may miss is just staying up to date on weather conditions. Yeah. Watching the weather conditions and staying aware of, am I going to see high winds in my area? Am I going to see an excessive amount of rainfall? Or is traveling around the area going to be hazardous? And as a storm is coming, we can't lose focus of it. If we may see, as we were talking about, a Category 2 turn into a Category 4 overnight.
That's why Alan says you should never let your guard down. If a storm is forecasted for your area, stay locked into your local municipalities and the Queen City News Pinpoint Weather Team. And be sure to stay updated on the constant changes with any approaching storm.
One great way to stay updated on the ever-changing forecast is by downloading that Pinpoint Weather app. It's free to download in your Apple App Store or Google Play.
Rising waters with no warning. Why some who survived the storm believe it did not have to be is devastating. It's a topic that we haven't seen very much coverage of since Helene hit last year. Taylor, that's the state of river gauges throughout North Carolina.
Yeah, Tara, river gauges are used for a variety of things, but one of their main purposes is to offer real-time data that could trigger a flood warning. Now, over the last several weeks, we have reached out to the state and local governments to get an update on the state of river gauges throughout North Carolina. We have not received a single response. So instead, we met up with a group of river experts who have been advocating for a better system to be put in place for years.
So hard to tell because everything's gone.
Historic floods across western North Carolina, washing away more than riverbanks. Helene taking pieces of the past, leaving Christy Thrift with nothing but memories.
So this was all green grass, and I had a gradual area down to a little swim hole that everybody in the county and community like to come swim and fish here.
In a town where the river once meant life and livelihood, on September 27th, it became a source of fear. As rising rivers swallowed entire roads, homes, and lives across Mitchell County, the former member of the Volunteer Fire and Rescue Squad in Spruce Pine says it didn't have to be this devastating.
I reported this gauge broken for 2.5 years, for every two weeks for 2.5 years to 6 different offices via phone, email, and voicemail.
Across the state, various types of river gauges installed along banks send real-time alerts as levels rise, offering crucial warnings before a flood hits. A division of the North Carolina Department of Public Safety plays a significant role in managing them. But aging equipment, funding gaps, and damage from previous hurricanes have left some areas like downtown Spruce Pine in the dark.
Yeah, this gauge hasn't worked since Hurricane Fred. This gauge was lost in 2021.
Following Helene, the concrete platform where the river gauge was once mounted is nowhere to be found.
Having additional sensors upstream in the form of river gauges would have given us a lot better understanding of what was coming for us.
On the morning Helene made its way over western North Carolina, Dale Irwin was camping along the Nolichucky.
We pulled our camper out of its spot and pulled it back what I thought was 100 feet further than I absolutely had to.
And it wasn't far enough. Irwin, an experienced river guide, was relying on data from upstream river gauges to determine the force of water heading his way. He says the information, due to the lack of working gauges, wasn't accurate.
Lives would have been saved in a very big way. The people who died in the industrial park because the water was just coming up so much faster than anticipated, those people would probably still be alive.
For weeks, we have reached out to the Department of Public Safety asking about the state of river gauges across North Carolina, if any were damaged during Helene, and how the state plans to address it. There has been no response.
The bridge could have been pushed up there too.
It's a similar experience for others who say they've been voicing their concerns for years.
I got nowhere, and then after Hurricane Helene, I almost felt responsible because I felt like I had been pleading for this device that could have saved lives.
Hurricane Helene is now a memory, one that Thrift also sees as a lesson.
We really have to have these in the western North Carolina Southeast mountains for these events because you're blind without them.
Now, there are many different types of river gauges in use across the state of North Carolina. Installation can cost anywhere between $20,000 and $35,000. Maintaining them can also be an additional thousands of dollars every single year.
Taylor, I want to stop and pause for a couple of minutes and talk to you about your experience, because you work in Charlotte, you work at Queen City News, but you and your husband, your home is in Saluda, North Carolina, which was right in the path of all that heavy rain and wind and from Helene. So what were you thinking just being at work and hearing about all the watches and warnings, and what were you thinking with your home to the west of here?
Yeah, I think my first thought is, wow, I don't think we prepared enough for this. I mean, we knew this was coming. We were reporting on it for several days at this point. And leading up to Helene, I mean, we did the things that you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to go get extra food, make sure you have batteries. But when this finally hit, and I was in Charlotte, my husband was home in Saluda, I mean, we were separated and we lost contact with each other for a couple of days. And I actually had to drive to Saluda without knowing what was going on, what the state of my house was, and had to actually hike up Weed Whack through the woods to get to my property. And I think that just kind of showed that while we did know this was coming, I don't think anyone knew to the extent of what was going to happen. And I think that we were very fortunate. I mean, we didn't get flooding. We are on a higher elevation, but just so many trees down, no communication, no cell phone, no power for more than 2 weeks. I know a lot of people had it a lot worse than that, but just throughout that region, I mean, the lack of communication was a major issue.
That was a big thing that we kept hearing more and more about. Now, here we are in hurricane season again. What are you doing now to prepare, you know, after everything that you went through last year?
Yeah, I think with the silver lining with Helene is that now this is a conversation that a lot of people are having, and not just with their spouses or their families, but their neighbors. I mean, we're all kind of checking in on each other. We know that we're approaching hurricane season, right? So a lot of people are kind of stocking up on the fuel, on the propane and the gas, so that if we were to go an extended period amount of time without electricity, I mean, your food could potentially still be frozen. You can still have the lights on, you can still charge things. Another is just kind of looking out for, first of all, removing a lot of those downed trees, but then looking at maybe some that could be problematic if we were to experience more high wind. And then I think lastly, plans in place for the days leading up to a hurricane. We know that we have to stock up on way more food than we did in the past. Again, the batteries, the radios, the crank radios, just in case there's no electricity.
And you have a lot of pets too.
Yeah, and that was one thing, you know, making sure you have cat or dog food. I have a snake. That snake went 2 weeks without eating. So it's just the little things that you don't think about, but preparing for the worst, hoping for the best.
Thank you for sharing, Taylor. With technology constantly changing, some of it is being used to prepare you better for the next big storm. We look at how it's being used to predict where a hurricane may be going sooner. Predicting the path of a hurricane is critical when it comes to preparation, but it also involves ever-changing technology to track data.
And the devastation that we saw from Helene highlighted the threats that we can see from hurricanes far away from the coastline. The National Hurricane Center is actually using a new experimental cone for Helene. I had a chance to talk to the director of the National Hurricane Center, Dr. Michael Brennan, about why the NHC is going to be using that experimental cone for all of 2025.
But the big change we're making with this version of the cone is we're showing the inland depiction of the tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings inland over areas of the continental United States to show users where that wind risk is. Our traditional cone really only showed the watches and warnings for wind along the immediate coastline. But you can see with a storm like Helene, where you have much of Florida, all of Georgia, large chunks of South Carolina and North Carolina at risk of those tropical storm force winds or even hurricane force winds farther south. This does a much better job of accurately depicting that risk and reminding users that those impacts will and often do extend well outside of the space covered by the cone itself.
The impact of Hurricane Helene on history and the electrical grid. We take a closer look at how it compares to other storms in history and why it's so different, and how Duke Energy is working to keep the lights on during the next round of severe weather.
Hurricane season, coast to crown. A Pinpoint Weather special presentation on Queen City News, sponsored by Integrity Roofing.
Welcome back to Coast to Crown, a Queen City News special.
In this half hour, we're looking at what has changed since Hurricane Helene and what life could look like without a major agency tasked with aiding recovery.
We're also putting Hurricane Helene and its impact on the Carolinas into perspective compared to our history with the tropics.
First, let's look back and recognize one of the most destructive hurricanes to hit the United States. This year marks 20 years since Hurricane Katrina made landfall. On August 29, 2005, the storm hit about 45 miles southeast of New Orleans. It was a Category 4 hurricane at the time. The powerful wind, storm surge, and levee failures put a significant portion of New Orleans underwater. More than 1,800 people were killed. Katrina is the costliest hurricane to ever hit the United States, causing more than $200 billion in damage.
One in 10,000. I mean, while that's technically impossible to track, it does put into context just how devastating the flooding was in western North Carolina from Helene.
I mean, no doubt Helene will go down as one of the most destructive storms we've ever seen in western North Carolina. We now have the data to look at and compare to other storms that we've seen in the past.
This flood was off the charts.
Statistically, this is the worst flooding event in the history of western North Carolina.
So we basically got 2 hurricanes worth of rain within 3 days.
How do you quantify the unimaginable? Whether it be a 20-foot storm surge that wipes out an entire beach, an earthquake that could devastate an entire city, maybe it's an EF5 tornado that wipes out an entire town, or it could be some of the worst river flooding we have ever seen in North Carolina and takes out a bridge like this. Well, there is a way to do that, and it's called a recurrence interval.
It's a phrase you've heard countless times when it comes to extreme weather events. Helene was a 1 in 100 or 1 in 500 year event. But what does that number actually mean? That number is referencing to a recurrence interval.
How frequently a storm occurs, so a 100-year storm occurs on average every 100 years. So it's like rolling a 100-side to die, and that's your chances. It can happen 2 years in a row, it can happen twice in 5 years, but on average, it will happen once every 100 years.
Calculating a recurrence interval is as simple as it sounds.
So if you have 10 years of record, the largest storm gets assigned to the 10-year flood because it happens once every 10 years, according to your 10-year record.
But in the North Carolina mountains, we can go much farther back in time than 10 years. That history of devastating flooding in North Carolina even goes all the way back to the boyhood days of David Crockett in 1791.
David Crockett's actual autobiography, in which he talks about that, he says that it was the second to Noah's Fresh. And of course, the fresh is another word for freshet, which is another word for flood.
That prehistoric flood was the all-time high crest for the Swannanoa River for 233 years. In more recent history, the flood that was talked about as one of the worst was the flood of 1916.
1916, it was 6 full days of flooding. When the flood came through, it took out these buildings, and of course, these were totally destroyed.
More recently, severe flooding in 2004 was the highest observed river levels at the Swannanoa since the advent of stream gauges in the 1920s. With these devastating floods throughout history, how do you put them in context? That's where recurrence intervals come in. Basically, how likely was this flood to occur in a given year? This is a chart of every flood observed at the Swannanoa River at the Biltmore since 1923. The worst flood on this graph occurred in 2004, a 1 in 100 year event based on 100 years of data. Now, let's add the infamous 1916 flood, known by many as the worst Carolina flooding in memory on this graph. But we can even go farther back in history with the flood of 1791, detailed by David Crockett, an estimated 1 in greater than 1,000 year event. Finally, let's add Helene onto this graph, now the worst flooding ever observed in state history. If you draw a straight line on this logarithmic graph, it corresponds to a greater than 1 in 10,000 year flood. But there's a problem with that number. We don't have 10,000 years of data.
What are the odds that we would have had two 10,000 year storms in 300 years of data?
While the devastating flooding from Helene can't be truly described as a 1 in 10,000 year event, it does mean that extreme floods like Helene could be becoming less and less statistically extreme.
Well, the 1916 flood was a 1 in 500 year flood. Well, then it happens again in 2004, and you say, well, maybe it's not a 1 in 500, maybe it's a 1 in 100. Then it happens again in 2024, and you say, well, maybe it's not a 2 in 100, maybe it's a 3 in 100, and now suddenly this becomes a 30-year storm.
As the extreme becomes more routine, the mountains will need to be prepared for the next major flood that comes to the region.
I would say I was not prepared for it, and I teach this stuff. I didn't stock up on water. I didn't get out of town, obviously. So I guess I was not prepared for that.
So as events like the devastation that we saw from Hurricane Helene potentially become more likely as we look ahead to the future, always make sure that you are prepared for the worst, hoping that it doesn't come to pass.
Hurricane Helene is making its mark on history, and Brandon, it continues to create change on how we protect the electrical grid.
That's right, Tara. When you think about who invented electricity, the names Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Edison may come to mind. But that was the 17 and 1800s. When you think about electricity now in the Carolinas, Duke Energy comes to the mind of many. The company is coming off its biggest power restoration effort ever in North and South Carolina history. For any electricity, you need a conductor. That is essential for power transmission. A power restoration success of this size also needs a conductor. That is where Jason Holyfield comes in, the general manager of emergency preparedness for Duke Energy across North and South Carolina.
This was orders of magnitude more significant than anything we've ever experienced in the Carolinas in the past.
Holyfield is referring to Helene. The storm knocked out power to millions of customers across the Carolinas.
And we had more than 23,000 people on the ground.
Duke Energy brought in crews from 32 U.S. states and 4 Canadian provinces, restoring power for 90% of customers in roughly a week.
That represented the line crews that were restoring power, setting poles, pulling wire. It also includes the vegetation crews that were, clearing trees from the roads, from the lines. It also includes the people that were on the ground doing damage assessment.
How much training goes into some of that work?
Oh, I tell you, I've talked to many linemen, and I've never met one that said they have learned it all. To start that work and to become proficient and skilled, it's probably a 4 to 6 year process.
While Holyfield was the conductor of getting the lights back on after Helene, Duke Energy lineman Miles Bell can be looked at as some of the manpower in the mission.
The lines were gone, the transformers were gone. It was just a 100% rebuild.
A rebuild that Bell says looked different from any other storm he has ever experienced.
We didn't even have power at our substations, so we literally started from ground zero. We had to get power back to our substations before we could even worry about getting the lines back up.
For Bell, this assignment was different in many ways, and it was not just the storm that made this a difficult recovery for him. Polk County, North Carolina is Bell's hometown.
Seeing the devastation, it really bothered me because I've been seeing this for almost 36 years, and now I come through and I don't even remember where some stuff was because things have changed so much.
One of the biggest issues for Duke Energy was road access, the power of water wiping out many roads here in Lake Lure, including the bridge that leads to Chimney Rock State Park. That is where this bad boy comes into play, the utility in the sky.
The helicopter was hovering about eye level with us, and they dropped that pole down in the hole there. And then we actually set 5 more poles up here on top with the helicopter that day.
Our drone footage shows some of the treacherous terrain the men and women would have had to hike without helicopter assistance.
We'd had to have enough people to literally just carry the pole because you can't get any track equipment or anything down there.
While the helicopter saved numerous days of work, the other big challenge was communication. The fix for that was a smaller device. Much smaller than a helicopter, of course.
We deployed 36 Starlink devices across parts of western North Carolina and upstate South Carolina, but we had to go out and secure those in a time where they were under great demand. Now we have contracts in place and we have the ability to deploy that number and more much more quickly in the future.
Speaking of looking ahead, Holyfield says newer base camps in the Helene-ravaged areas will lead to an even faster power restoration, preparing the power company for any major storms in the future.
Those locations and those sites are under contract and we can make quick use of them.
Another big challenge the workers face was a challenge that was hard to escape.
I was contacted at one point and they said, we have the beds we need, we have all the meals we need, but people can't sleep because of the things they're seeing during the day, the human impacts of this. We ended up having to put grief counselors in our base camps just for the crews to have someone to talk to.
It kind of just becomes your lifestyle, and your family knows, hey, when a storm hits, Daddy's going to be gone for a little while. Thankfully, I got a really good support group at home, and they kind of take care of themselves and then take care of me when I finally get there.
It is safe to say Duke Energy has had their biggest power restoration success in their Carolinas history, but the new hurricane season is here, and they are just as prepared for this season as they were for the last.
We are as strong as we were before Helene hit in terms of our staffing, our materials, our preparation, and we would be ready to respond.
The power is back on, but it is going to take years for Duke Energy to get its infrastructure back to where it was. When we look at the cost of all this, just in North Carolina alone, as of us recording this, Duke Energy has spent close to $1 billion. The company continues to search for other ways to recover those costs to keep rates lower for their customers.
Destruction in the name of protecting your home from storms and higher insurance claims. How one local group's testing works to lower any potential bill you could face following a storm. One of the most important things you can do to prepare ahead of a storm is to know your insurance. When it comes to storm damage, not everything may be covered under your current policy. Furthermore, there are things you can do to prevent storm damage to some of the main parts of your home. I took a tour of a local facility that's conducting experiments on that very thing. 3, 2, 1. This is just one of the many tests conducted at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety.
What our goal is here is to really minimize disruption and reduce loss from natural hazards.
Rachel Goche is a meteorologist with IBHS. She walked me through this sprawling campus in rural Chester County, South Carolina. There's a multi-story wall of fans, a roof aging farm, and various structures designed to be torn apart by wind, hail, and fires. They can simulate a Category 3 hurricane or turn on the water to demonstrate the effects of intense rainfall rates. IBHS is a nonprofit scientific research and communications organization. The research they do here provides valuable information to the insurance industry, as well as home and business owners. A big focus is on rooftops, the structure and the materials.
At IBHS, we say the roof is your home's first line of defense, and it really is. Once your roof is damaged, that can lead to other structural damage as well. So the key is really just trying to prevent that damage at all costs.
Check this out. This is your standard roof construction. Under the shingles, you've got the roof deck and this underlayment cloth to act as a water barrier. But look how easily it can be torn apart.
Okay.
A powerful storm could expose the wooden roof deck, allowing water to get inside. And this could lead to bigger problems.
Your insurance claim is usually going to be 3 times higher on average once water actually makes its way into your home.
IBHS is working to make your home stronger. Their Fortified Roof program involves a flashing tape that covers the exposed crack in the wooden roof deck. It's then covered with an underlayment made of felt paper, which is twice as thick as the standard cloth. Special nails hold it all in place.
That's definitely tougher.
And it's worked. Rachel cites one of their most recent findings after Hurricane Sally hit coastal Alabama in 2020.
We had 17,000 of our fortified homes in the path, and less than 1% of those folks had to file an insurance claim for damage.
Some states are working to make sure stronger products like this become the standard. In the U.S., there's no universal building code. It's left up to the individual states.
Some states, like Florida, have a really great building code. North Carolina is kind of in between. It has a pretty decent code, but plenty of room to improve as well. South Carolina also needs some improvement.
Regardless of how tough your home may be, the reality is that with a powerful enough storm, some damage may be done. That's where insurance comes in. First things first, check your insurance policy and know what it covers. Make sure you have a copy of your policy, know who your agent is, and how you can contact them if you experience damage. Flood insurance is a whole separate policy, which Rachel explains is something everyone should think about.
Wherever it can rain, it can flood. Again, we saw that in North Carolina with that catastrophic inland flooding. So I encourage people to look at the flood history of their neighborhood and their community. Find out if where you live has flooded before, even if you're not in a floodplain.
Take an inventory of items in your home.
Walk into every room of your house, take a video, show everything that's in these rooms, especially those higher price items, things like appliances, exercise equipment. Open the cabinet, show what's in there, and then just save this video in a safe place like the cloud so that you can access it later. And then if you do have to file an insurance claim, you won't have to think about that during a stressful time.
Double check your coverage and make sure it's enough so you won't run the risk of being underinsured. Finally, make sure this is all in place well in advance of a storm.
If there's a storm in the Gulf or the Atlantic, often there'll be a waiting period, and you can't just go out and get an insurance policy that day for flood or hurricane or whatever it is you're trying to get.
The cost of homeowners insurance is continuing to rise. The U.S. had $27 billion disasters in 2024, and price follows risk. Even if you don't live in a high disaster zone, your insurance premium can still increase. After all, those losses have to go somewhere. The largest agency tasked with disaster response could be on the chopping block. Next, we take a look at what life without FEMA could look like. Should another big storm hit, there's a lot of questions about the future of disaster response. The White House has signaled that they want to dissolve FEMA, the federal agency tasked with disaster response. As chief political correspondent Andy Weber found, North Carolina leaders are divided on what should happen.
We want to wean off of FEMA, and we want to bring it down to the state level.
President Donald Trump made waves recently when he committed to dissolving FEMA, the federal agency that handles disaster response. It was an idea he floated when he visited Western North Carolina back in January.
I like, frankly, the concept when North Carolina gets hit, the governor takes care of it. When Florida gets hit, the governor takes care of it.
It's Trump's position the current structure doesn't allow for a quick enough response. He told reporters in the Oval Office he wants a new framework that would send federal dollars directly to the states.
And when you have a tornado or a hurricane or you have a problem of any kind in a state, that's what you have governors for. They're supposed to fix those problems. And it's much more local, and they'll develop a system, and I think it'll be a great system.
Western North Carolina's Congressman Chuck Edwards is on board, telling Queen City News bureaucracy got in the way of speedy and effective relief in the wake of Hurricane Helene. What specifically to you sticks out as gumming up the current system?
Well, the first thing is just the lack of a customer service orientation. They're more interested in pushing paperwork than they are in serving the people in Western North Carolina that have so counted on them through this disaster.
What should replace FEMA, Edwards argues, is a small group of experts that consult, not direct states on recovery efforts following a disaster.
There needs to be a core group of consultants here in Washington, D.C.
But North Carolina Governor Josh Stein says dissolving FEMA is far too drastic, going as far to make that argument before a national audience on CBS's The Late Show with Stephen Colbert.
That's why we have the federal expertise and we need the federal resources, because the scale of these storms are so massive. To eliminate FEMA would be a man-made disaster when we need FEMA to respond to natural disasters.
Stein told Colbert the president should lean on Congress to find places where red tape can be cut.
There are things that FEMA can do differently and better. Anything can be improved, and the fact of the matter is that Congress has tied the hands of FEMA.
As it stands now, the Trump administration says they will start weeding off of FEMA after the 2025 hurricane season. But what that actually looks like and where the money will come from to help support states during disasters, those specifics still haven't been addressed. Andy Weber, Queen City News.
As of June, FEMA has approved close to $800 million for individual and housing needs in the Carolinas. But Governor Stein believes that recovery in North Carolina alone will cost close to $60 billion. We'll be right back. The 2025 hurricane season is underway.
Now is the best time to prepare for the next big storm.
Whether it's stocking up on supplies or making upgrades to your home, there's no step too small to take.
When the tropics hit the Carolinas, preparation now can save your life.
With meteorologist Ted Phaeton, Andrew Brightman, and Brandon Lawson, I'm Chief Meteorologist Tara Lane. Thank you for watching From Coast to Crown, a Queen City News special.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.